Welcome to our Bible study tonight. Good to see you here. We're going to have a great time in the Word of God. And this has just been over the top, the responses we've already received from folks that watched it last week. We began a series entitled How to Have a Strong Godly Marriage. And last week was our first lesson. And people were commenting, this needs to be taught in every church. And when I come across this book by Willard F. Harley Jr., His Needs, Her Needs, I realized this is powerful stuff. And we wanted to put it in the hands and in the hearts of everybody. And so we've been continuing for the second time right now. And we're going to continue it again, of course, next Thursday. And just we pray in the name of Jesus Christ that every person has a desire to just live the way that God wants us to live, and strong marriages and strong families and so forth aren't just for married people to learn from. That you might be single out there, and if you've got any plans of ever being married, this is perfect chance for you to hear this kind of teaching. And you'll know what I mean by the time we get right in the middle of it if you haven't watched it also last week. In our last lesson, we talked about how that it's so important that couples know that they each have needs that the other might not be aware of. And remember, we showed you that screen of the 10 emotional needs that everybody has. There might be some variations with people that maybe there's something else that should be in amongst those 10 and that isn't there. But there's 10 emotional needs. And the top 5, we asked all of you, and if you weren't watching this last week, let me get that ready on the screen again so I can show you those needs, those top 10 needs. Just a moment. And here they are. Write this down if you weren't watching last week, because this is so important. Most basic needs of any person. And the top 5, we asked everybody, especially husbands and wives, to mark down, rearrange them, and put what they think are the top 5. And then to show each other later on. Because a man's top 5 is not what a woman's top 5 needs are. And even women, compared to other women, they change things around with what's top number 1 to them and so forth. But generally speaking, men's and women's top needs are just totally different. And when a man's trying to meet his wife's top 5 needs, usually he thinks of what he likes for his top 5. And so he tries to give her those things, and they're not really, appealing to her. And she'd be doing the same thing with him. Taking her top 5 needs are probably his. You know, they're a couple, they know each other, they probably have the same top 5 priorities. And that's not necessarily the case. So what it is that you show each other your top 5, and then each of you strive to become experts at meeting your spouse's top 5 needs. And it's not easy when they're not your top 5 needs. It's almost when there's something at the bottom of your list and your wife's got it at the top of hers, well, it's going to be kind of boring perhaps to try to do that. But what you'll do is you'll learn to love it the more you do it, because it's so important. So there they are. If you haven't seen it, write those down and keep them and share them with each other after you sort them out to what your top 5 would be. So now let's just go to the scripture. Praise God. And as I said, I want to read from 1 Corinthians 13, and you knew this was coming one of these nights. Bible says in verse 13, now abideth faith, hope, and charity, these 3, but the greatest of these is charity. And of course, this is what this is all about. A godly and a strong marriage is going to have strong love. And the Bible also tells us in 1 Corinthians 10 and 12, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Because just very quickly, let me mention this point that we said last week. People can have this reputation of being the strongest committed spiritual person, but its facts are facts. Having a strong relationship with Jesus is going to take you through everything. But it's not easy to have a strong relationship with Jesus when the enemy's attacking you with temptations because your spouse isn't meeting your top 5 needs, and you begin wondering, Where else can I find it? Because these top 5 needs, you can't allow anybody outside your marriage to even go anywhere near that. You can't allow them to offer that to you. You resist it, you walk away. But when you're not getting them, then your barrier breaks down and you're tempted to let somebody else provide them to you. So that's kind of what we really focused on last time. And of course, the Bible says that a man and a woman are one flesh. Part of Adam was taken and removed from him, and he'll be driven from his father and his mother to find his wife to fulfill that need. Not that the father and mother want them to go, but he's driven within himself. I've got to be complete. I've got to find my other half. So let's get into this now, and let's continue. And we're going to get into an interesting little thought here tonight that you might never have heard. Like I said, you have to be careful. Take heed lest you fall. You can become friends with somebody during a time of maybe when your top 5 needs are lacking and you don't intend anything and you don't mean anything by this. And you begin to be concerned about this person. They're becoming concerned with you, and that's what's making you more concerned with them. They see that there's something missing in your life and they begin to get concerned, and then an affection starts forming because they're looking for whatever they can do to help you, and it's causing you to get an affection. You see, as we get into tonight, we're going to mention a lot of things that are going to help you really understand how this works, the whole mechanics behind it. But somebody's lacking something in their life. Their spouse isn't giving this certain thing to them, or a couple things, and they're explaining to could be a friend at work, a coworker, could be somebody that you're involved with in a local community group, and your spouse isn't involved, but you like to be involved, and you find somebody of the opposite sex there, and they like to be involved, and then they notice you might be down and just neither party meaning anything by it, but just want to naturally help. Is there something like you don't feel, and then you begin saying, well, you haven't been feeling that great and there's things concerning you, and you don't get into it, of course, at that point. But the more time is taken with those kind of experiences happening, then a sincere and honest care, and that's all it started out with, can start forming into an affection. And then each party begins explaining what they want most in life. And then you start thinking, I'm going to meet your needs of what you need most in life. And the other one says, I'm going to meet your needs. And that might not be the way that they phrase it, of course, but that becomes their desire. And then it could lead to an affair, all because some needs weren't being met. So we're going to find out that the grace, and this is why the book from which we're teaching is entitled His Needs, Her Needs, because you've got to become aware of your spouse's needs so that you know what it is that you need to work on and provide those things. And of course, your spouse learns that and does that for you as well. But then this affair, of course, goes into full-fledged adultery, and it's so easy. It seems so natural. It's like people felt they were made for each other. And like it could be people that had a great reputation for strong Christianity, and they sincerely were committed. But then where was the commitment later on? You see, we're going to deal with all of that. But the number one key is never to let anyone outside your marriage. When you become aware of this, it's much easier to make sure it never happens. Don't let anyone outside of your marriage deal with these top 5 personal needs that you have. And I'm going to kind of explain it now in what Harley, the author, called your love bank. And you might not have realized it before, but you've got a love bank, and every one of us do. And there's what it is. It's like a scoring device inside that you probably never realized anything about. Let me explain. When we're ready to say I do, we walk the aisle and we have that commitment made at the marriage. I do. We think there's some kind of success happens when there's the right couple happen to just coincidentally meet. Because a lot of people, I mean, it rose up to over 50% of marriages ended in divorce within the last several years. And that's not a very good average. A 50-50 chance of staying married and not being divorced. That's what we've come to. And it's crept into the church. I mean, you've got movie star ministries with Hollywood's movie star rates of divorce. It seems to be so common among them. And then if a marriage doesn't work out, they say, well, they were wrong for each other. And it's not that simple. Breakups happen when one or both parties in the marriage don't have the awareness of each other's needs or the skill to meet those needs. And those emotional needs being unmet, that's the biggest cause right there. It's really got nothing to do with the right people or the wrong people. Being right or wrong for somebody isn't some mysterious compatibility quotient that they've just stumbled upon and it just works for them. That is not the way it works. Anybody in any situation of a marriage can make the marriage work if they understand this entire principle that his needs are not her needs, and she needs to recognize what his needs are and try to meet them, and her needs are not his needs, and he needs to recognize that he needs to start meeting her needs. Every marriage can be resolved like that. They might have had affairs, but they don't have to sink. You can bring them into a dry dock, you can repair them, and you could refit them, and that marriage can actually become stronger than it ever was. I remember a man for whom I designed a logo for his ministry, and he was working in Africa, and they wanted streams in the desert, scripture about streams in the desert. And so I made this S like a stream, and I made it on a desert background, and I embossed it so that you could see the stream sinking into the sand and so forth. And anyway, he sent me this big, beautiful eagle. He knew I loved the bald eagle. I just love that picture. And on the plane trip, bringing it over, it broke. I mean, it had big, beautiful wings like this. This big was one wing, and then the other wing, and the thing stands like that size. And the wing broke right off. So he had that repaired. He took it to a shop, and they glued it, and they told him, you know something? If it's going to break, it'll never break here again. And in other words, your marriage can be stronger than it ever was before in the very areas where it was broken, if it's fitted right and glued together with this understanding and this awareness and an experience that you gain so that you can be skillful at meeting the other's needs. So powerful once you understand it. So it's not just getting a marriage that's been broken up by an affair to be rectified and solved and go on again. But for people that have never had this happen in their marriages, and for those that have, having a marriage that becomes affair-proof. It's just not going to have affairs because it's so strong. That's the goal. And this minister that wrote this book, this is what his desire was. And the Lord really gave him insight. Like, wow. So when relationships can be built up through this understanding, you can actually increase the romance and the intimacy, and the closeness gets better year after year. That's what makes an affair-proof marriage. And if it's affair-proof, you might not even concerned over an affair. That'd be the last thing maybe coming to anybody's mind in some cases of marriage. But that doesn't matter. You want a great marriage as best as it could be anyway. I mean, it'd be a shame just to try to make a good marriage just because you're afraid there's going to be an affair. It's kind of based on doubt, isn't it? But to be affair-proof, you have to know each other's basic needs and you have to know how to meet them. And so you need to understand how needs are so powerful in each person in that marriage, each party. And they can be all-consuming, these needs. Now, we talked about clients that were going to these marriage counselors and how this one Willard Harley, found a key, and he was teaching it to his church, and then it went on and found itself in the Revel Publishing Company, and it's become a million seller and bestseller. And this man realized you can understand how there's a scorekeeping system that happens in each one of us. And he brought it out like this by comparing it with the love bank, what he called the love bank. And everybody has one. It's like this love bank has accounts in it. And those accounts are for every person that you know. Everybody. Everybody you know has an account in your love bank. And each one that you know either makes deposits into it or they make withdrawals from it. And you actually are conscious of this. You don't think of it as a love bank, obviously, but you're going to know what I mean as we continue on. Whenever we interact with a person, they're either going to deposit into our love bank or they're going to withdraw. Now, by love bank, I don't mean a romantic love bank. I mean, there's just a common love we need to have for everybody. Amen. And when you have interactions with them that are really great, you have a good time with somebody, then they've just deposited a whole bunch into their account in your love bank. And when you have a painful interaction with them, something you didn't enjoy at all, it did not go well, a certain relationship, situation that rose up between you, well, when that happens, they've actually withdrawn from your love bank. And your heart is kind of keeping score of this. Now, for example, in my love bank system and yours, every one of these deposits or withdrawals, you could call them love units. You know, if you're measuring with a ruler, what units are you using? Inches or centimeters or meters? When you weigh things, in kilograms or pounds. So the unit is a pound or the unit is an inch or the unit is a kilogram. We're just going to call these love units. Dollars are another unit. Pounds in England are another unit for currency. But these are just going to be called love units. And if I meet somebody and just say you call him Jim, and when you meet him, I meet Jim, you know, he's a good guy and I'm comfortable around him. Well, one or two love units have just gotten into the account in my love bank with his name on it. And if I kind of have a great time with this guy, he becomes a good friend, well, 5 units go in instead of just 1. And when this guy's just really great to be around, I'm having a wonderful time, you know, like 10 units have gone in. But when this guy really does you favors and he's just there, I mean, that it goes up to like 20 units. You know, this sky's the limit when you just have a great time with this person. But just think if you had an uncomfortable experience with somebody. And then maybe somebody named Jane, you know, somebody named Jane, and she's a friend of yours, an acquaintance. And then you didn't really have a good experience in this one discussion maybe you were having. Well, they just withdrew 2 units from your love bank. And if Jane made you feel real bad, well, 5. She just withdrew 5 from your love bank. And then if you have one of the worst experiences of your life with Jane, then there's 20 units she just withdrew from your love bank. And so when your life continues on, the accounts go up and down and they fluctuate with how many love units are in it, with everybody you know. And some of your friends build really good sizable deposits. They're just some of your best, they're your best friends. Others, they remain in the black, but it's not very much. They just haven't done very much to make you feel comfortable. So you got nothing against them, but you enjoy yourself around other people more than that. And you just maybe because you don't have many times you're interacting with that person. So it's just kind of low anyway. It's only natural it would be like that. But then there's a third group of people that they build up such small, good relationships with you in your life that, you know, you kind of look at them as, well, sometimes I have a good time with them and sometimes I don't. You know, it's mixed. Sometimes it's pleasant. It might be painful at other times. And it's almost as many with units that they're putting in, they're withdrawing. So they kind of remain at nothing really. Now, then there's other people that go into the red. And they withdraw so much that they're in the red category now. They've caused you more pain than they've ever caused you pleasure. We all know people like that. When you just think of that person, you never feel good, ever. It's just been nothing but bad experiences with them, and their accounts are just overdrawn all the time. So here's a story that explains how the love bank works in your life. Now, it's not mathematically correct. I don't know what the exact measures would be. And Harley, when he was writing this book, he said, I don't know exactly how, but you understand just basically in the general idea. It's just emphasizing the fact that we affect each other emotionally with every encounter we have with them. And this will help you understand how bad things can start happening in a marriage. When you accumulate positive points or negative experiences that determine your emotional reaction, it affects you and it leaves a lasting impression in your life. You're not aware of it while it's happening, of course. You don't think of it like, okay, they just drew 20 units from my love bank and I'm staying away from them. I don't want them to be overdrawn, Yeah, that's not what comes to your mind. And then you don't say, well, that's a 15-unit deposit. Man, I'm really going to be friends with them. That's just not the way we think. But that's kind of what's happening. Love units are going in or they're going out. And two love banks always operate in a marriage all the time. Of course, the husband and the wife each have their own love banks, his and hers. And so we're going to talk about John and Mary as a couple. John and Mary got married. And you can see what happens when a wife's account that's in her husband's love bank takes a huge dip. And you can understand that there are women waiting in the wings where John works at his office. And so we're going to focus on John's love bank because in this story, he ends up having an affair, just so you follow what happens. So let's go right back to the beginning. John met Mary. And as soon as he met her, something special was there. You see, she's not only really beautiful and good looking, but she's charming and she's smart, she's intelligent, and she's full of life. And John, in his love bank, he instantly has 15 units deposited into her, first time he met her. And a day or two later, John calls Mary and asks her for a date. And so she accepts and John hangs up. 10 more units just went into his love bank in her account. And on the date, they have a great time. And then John thinks this has been one of the best experiences I've ever had. And 20 more units go into her account in his love bank. And then it comes up to now, she's got 45 units in John's love bank in her account. So a second date, it's almost as good, but it didn't get 25 more, or it got about 15 more love units, and so now there's 60 love units in his love bank under Mary's account. And the next time he calls her for a date, something come up and she had to turn him down. And so she says, I'm truly sorry. I had a commitment I had several weeks ago and I can't break it, but I'm free the next night. Okay. I want to make sure. She's sure to let him know the next night would work perfect if John would still be interested. And so he's definitely interested. I mean, she's got 60 love units in that account. And he says, okay, I'll pick you up about 8 o'clock. And then what had happened to Mary's account as a result of that very slightly negative encounter, he thinks she definitely sounded sorry that she can't go out with me. And I can't expect her to be available all the time anyway. I mean, I don't know what her life is scheduled like. I've just met her recently. And she did suggest, let's get together the next night. So, I know how she must like me. So no matter how much he tries to reassure himself, he still felt slightly uncomfortable. He really would have liked to have gone out. And so 1 unit came out. Now that's not bad because she's got 60 in there, and just 1 coming out when she was putting 10 in there and 40 and all sorts. And over the next few months, they date regularly and they're dating often. And fabulous and wonderful experiences, really enjoying themselves. They far outnumber the occasional negative one. And her balance is soon at 500 love units. But then Sarah, an old flame that John used to have, only her caused him, about a year ago, they had broken up. Only she had put more than that in his love account before. So this is really beginning to be special to John. And he begins to believe he's falling in love with Mary. Now 6 more months go by and Mary's balance is now at a strong 1,000 love units in his account, in her account in his bank. That nobody had ever put that much in John's life before. And it's way beyond what he and Sarah had. Sarah didn't have that much. So John starts thinking, I've never loved anybody as much as I'm loving Mary right now. And he tells her she's the most attractive, she's the most beautiful, intelligent, sensitive, charming, and delightful woman he ever met. And Mary appeals to John because of her balance in his love bank. And he associates her with so many positive, fantastic, fabulous emotions. And there's only just a few negative ones. So he looks forward to every time he can date this woman, and he dwells on her when they're apart. And he begins to wonder, what would happen if I ever lost her? If I just didn't have her to see like this. So he can't imagine going through life without her. And sure enough, he thinks, with Mary at my side, I wouldn't need anyone. I wouldn't need anything else to make me happy. And those thoughts of marriage start beginning in his mind. Meanwhile, John's account in Mary's love bank, that's grown steadily as well, but maybe not at the same pace. You see, when they met, Mary thought John was very attractive. And the first dates were very good experiences. And at that point, she's really fond of him, and she knows it. But she still isn't sure. And Mary remembers Bob. And she liked Bob before he'd broken it off with her, because he ended up marrying an old friend from high school. And on their next date, Mary just blurts out and says, I need a little breathing room, John. And she says, let's just suspend our dating for about a month. And then we'll know if we should, maybe it wouldn't be bad to date somebody else in the meantime, you know. And John is just devastated at this point. That registered as an all-time painful experience in his life. I mean, even David said, if it had been an enemy that hurt me, it wouldn't have been so strongly a hurt. But my friend, my close friend, did this to me. So the same thing might have been done by him if he just decided to go out with somebody and they just said, no, let's just break it off. We've gone out a couple times. But she had built so many love units in her account, in his love bank, that this hurt him, devastated him. And so 30 units immediately are gone from her huge account that's in his love bank. Now, there's still lots there, obviously, but 30 units was a big chunk to come out all at once. And a few days later, he calls her and tries to convince her to change her mind. But she says, no, I mean it. I believe we need to take a break and maybe see somebody else, just, you know. So he tries calling over her the next week, several times. And she says, nope. And before he decides to leave her alone for the month, about a month, there's now 200 love units that have been withdrawn from her account in his love bank. He spends the month just feeling miserable about it. He's still deeply in love. I mean, there's far more in there that remain than were taken out. And there's 800. I mean, she had 1,000 in there, and it's still 800. And he tries to date several other women, but he just thinks they don't stand a chance with Mary. There's just no way. He's so crazy about her. He says dating anybody else, it became a negative experience. You know, the poor people that he dated didn't do anything wrong, but because of this situation in him, no fault of theirs. It's just they're nothing but debits in their accounts in his life, these other ones he tries to meet. So at the end of the month, he calls her up. And her balance remained at 800 because there just wasn't any negative experiences. He just was pining for her, and he was just upset. And they didn't have any interaction. So she says, John, I missed you. And he starts getting ecstatic about it. I really missed you terribly. And she accepts his invitation to go out the very next evening. All she needed, she says, was, I just wanted time to see how I felt and to think things through. And now that's the first time after a month-long separation. And it's very memorable. And then dates after that seem better than they ever did. And at the end of the year, her balance has risen to 2,000 units. And at the same time, John's account in Mary's love bank has risen steadily, and it's at an all-time high. It's not 2,000, but it's 1,100. I mean, it's more than what he had with her before he heard of this devastating news that she just wanted a break for a while. And then Mary starts thinking of wedding bells. So let's look at 1,000 as there's a wedding and being planned here now, and he's at 1,100 in her, and she's got 2,000 in his love bank. So one night after dinner, they go to their favorite restaurant, and John proposes. He says, I want to live my life for your happiness, and I'm going to assure you that if you marry me, he says, you'll never do anything. He'd never do anything to hurt her, ever. It just would never happen. And she accepts and says yes, and they have a brief engagement, and now they're man and wife. But let's go beyond the honeymoon now. In the first year of their marriage, it's extremely happy, both of them. Without really thinking about it, they met each other's basic needs really well. They weren't even thinking about it. You see, they just had so much love for each other that they were looking to fulfill each other's needs. But again, it's a honeymoon period. You almost can't go wrong in some, So John remains affectionate, he's patient, and he's as caring as he was when they first dated. Now, Mary responds passionately in their times of intimacy, and they spend so much time together. They share their hopes and dreams. They have long conversations. And then Mary picks up tennis lessons so she can keep up with John in his favorite recreational pastime because he loved it, and she was meeting that need. She wanted to do it too. And she knows she can trust him because she found John's very honest in everything. He's proud of an attractive wife like he has. And he just loves how she handles details around the house, and she's still keeping her secretarial job on a part-time basis. And he's earning such an excellent income, and he's a computer analyst. But he and Mary have agreed that she could work as much as she likes. And at least for the present. So Mary feels secure with John. See, this is what men have need of. They want to know that they're providing for the wife, and the wife is looking for security, and the husband's looking to be honored and depended on. And so she's secure with him. He gives every indication that he loves her and he wants to settle down in home and just have a family. That's it. And she's proud, and she often tells him how proud she is of him. And during their first year of that bliss going on, what happens to each of their accounts in each other's love banks? Well, they really don't accumulate at the rate they did before they were married. Mainly because they've got more experiences than they ever had, and they're sharing them. And that was different than when they were dating. They were just learning each other's experiences at that point. But now that they're together, they're together when they feel good and when they feel bad. Now that doesn't happen on dating. You're not living with each other when you're dating. But when you're living together, you're married, then you're there when times aren't so good as well as times are good. And credits and debits in their accounts are posted along with their ups and their downs. It's just happening. And because it's not such a vast, quick accumulation like it was before they were married, Mary's balance in John's love bank still is increasing. And at the end of their first year, her net gain from the previous year comes to about 100 more units. And so now her overall total in his account is 2,100 units. And about the same pattern happens with John. His account increases to 1,200 in her love bank. And during the next 4 years, accounts in both love banks continue to arise. And notice, he has more of hers in his love bank than he has in hers. And then 5-year anniversary comes. And John is madly in love with Mary, still madly in love. And she feels about the same for him that she has. It hadn't hit that madly level like it has with him. And so they decide they're going to have a family. And little Tiffany is born and arrives. And that brings their 6th year of marriage into play. And then serious changes start happening at that point. After 6 years of marriage, Mary's still the joy of John's life. But he notices there's more downtime now than there used to be with her. And Tiffany's a little doll. He loves her. He'd do anything for her. But she's bringing new demands to his wife. And she's creating new demands. And she's creating negative experiences, which is only natural. And it's his time to change the baby's diaper in the middle of the night. And that's not what John considers to be a pleasant experience. And although it's his own daughter and this is his family, it still affects people emotionally. And Mary's decision not to nurse Tiffany leaves John with his share of responsibilities to walk and hold the bottle. And not only that, Mary's got a tough time losing the weight that she gained during the pregnancy. So a net result of all those common little annoyances, Mary's balance in John's love bank drops 100 units. He'd never get rid of her, but that's, you got 2,100 there and more. 100, is not really significant. Yet Mary's balance still remains high and John still feels deeply in love with her. But around the time when Tiffany turns 2, I don't know if it's the terrible 2s or not, but Mary's getting restless. She wants to be more than just a part-time secretary at this point. And she wants to have a more important career. She doesn't want to wait until all her children are grown up and gone. And she says, John, would you object if I return to college? I want to finish up the bachelor's degree I was working on and maybe go for a master's in business administration. It'll take 6 years of classes, but I'll quit my part-time job. I can concentrate on the baby during the day, and I can take most of the classes in the evening. And John agrees. He's excited for her. He's enthusiastic. He's got a solid income. It's stable, and they don't really need her paycheck anyway to keep going like they are. So I'll even babysit in the evening when you're at school. That'll be no problem. And when you got to finish up some homework assignments, I'll babysit then as well. Well, a woman named Noreen enters into the picture. Mary's in classes and she's earning great grades, but those grades mean sacrifice. And John's not too happy about those sacrifices kind of increasing. And what bothers him the most is that Mary rarely seems to be in the mood for intimacy. And John understands the situation and he understands where she's coming from. School takes a lot of energy, and what's left, she's got to do housekeeping and she's got to take care of their child. And in the evening, she's exhausted. And he says, well, if I insist on things, then it's going to look pretty inconsiderate. So he makes the best of it, and it's not so frequent, and it's more hurried when they're intimate. And but he misses the attention that she used to give him in the tennis games that they always enjoyed together every Saturday morning. And now she's hardly spending any time at all with him, and let alone playing tennis on Saturdays. So on the weekends, she's always doing housework. She's catching up on her homework and getting ready for Monday's classes. And so they continue for 2 years in this pattern. And her account in John's love bank is dropping slowly, but it's dropping steadily. He begins wondering, what happened to the wonderful woman that I married? She's lost in her books and she doesn't want to discuss her classes. She just says, it's all stuff you had years ago, because he's a computer analyst. And she says, you're a math expert and I'm not taking that much math. And so John's account in Mary's love bank is holding steady because John's helping to meet a very important need in her life. And she's getting an education. That means a lot for her. And for him to allow her to do this, she says, I know we haven't spent much time together, but she really appreciates the sacrifices he's making, and he seems to be totally committed to the family. So it just remained the same for her. And she thinks things are going to be better as soon as I get my degree, she tells herself. And so she plunges herself right into studying. And she really never correctly understood what he was feeling. So at work, he's spending more and more time with a coworker named Noreen. And she's an attractive product manager at the company he's at. And the company transfers her to his department. And then they start working together on a regular basis. And when Noreen's husband leaves her for another woman, he tries to give her as much comfort and support like he can on a totally sincere approach, not meaning anything to develop. I've talked with people and they said, we never meant nothing to develop. And they're honest as can be. So over the months, his friendship gets deeper every day. And soon there's a few hundred love deposits deposited in his bank account. Now, when they talk together at coffee at work, deposits are happening. And he's got no qualms about sharing the good and bad experiences of his life with her. You know, she's a good friend. I can talk to somebody. You know, you get the idea. Everybody needs to talk to somebody. So then talking with her gave him the feeling with her of what it was like with him and Mary at the beginning. You know, the old days with her. So when he feels frustrated because Mary's doesn't have much time for intimacy, for example, or just studying is all she seems to be wrapped up in, he shares that frustration with Noreen, and he finds out she's really sympathetic toward him. And she lets him know, since her divorce, she feels frustrated about intimacy as well. And weeks and months go by, and Mary is finishing her bachelor's degree. She's launching into her master's program, and then she says, John, only 2 more years, and it's going to be done. And you've been so wonderful to back me up. And his account stayed at that level in her bank. And he smiles and says, I'm glad to do it. But inside, he's actually thinking something else. She's so wrapped up in that degree, she can't think of anything else, he starts thinking. And he tells Noreen this the next day at work. I want her to have it, but I'm wondering if the price is too much to pay. I think our marriage has suffered. And a few weeks later, she's really getting overwhelmed. She's got her midterm exams coming up, and John gets hit with a special project that gets him into a time of overtime at work. And Noreen is working with him more than ever. And one night, as they're working late, it happens. John's telling Noreen how lonely he feels. And the next moment, she's in his arms. And they're becoming intimate. And when it's over and they're getting ready to go home for the evening, he's visibly agitated and he's nervous and feeling guilty. And Noreen senses it and she says, I don't want to wreck your marriage. I don't want to come between you and Mary. She says, if I have to be honest, I've fallen in love with you and I want to make you happy. Why don't we just get together when we can? That's all I want. I don't want to wreck your marriage. And on his way home, John thinks, I don't need to feel guilty after all. In fact, I'm feeling pretty good right now. It was no fault of hers, and she's unable to meet his intimate needs. And Noreen, she doesn't want nothing more than to fill in as a temporary partner in intimacy. And she doesn't want any more commitment than that. So maybe I'll just let her because it's helping me meet her needs too. And then he rationalizes it. He reasons it. And it's all going to be temporary anyway. You know, until Mary is finished with school and can have more energy, then whatever guilt he feels was just squashed with the thought of unfulfilled needs. And so from then on, him and Noreen make meetings at least once a week. and sometimes more. And in less than a year, Noreen's account in John's love bank jumps to 1,000 units, the marriage level, and Mary's has dropped to 1,000. So hers was up to 2,100, 2,000, then she's down to 1,000, and Noreen is up to 1,000. And he finds himself in love with two women. He doesn't have these frustrations of intimacy. His relationship with Mary actually improves a great deal because he doesn't want the marriage to break up anyway. And then they're including their daughter Tiffany in everything they do. They make a special effort to do family outings. And when Mary's got a brief break from her studies and is willing to become intimate with John, he's enthusiastic. But it's not happening very often. So John and Noreen work out their rendezvous like a science. They become so skillful in hiding and pretending and working around. And he never gives the morality of his situation a second thought. He doesn't feel guilty anymore. And that huge project that he'd taken on that demanded the overtime, Mary never suspected a thing when that happened again. And Mary would never have known Noreen existed if it hadn't been for Jane, her good friend. And through another woman whose husband works in John's division of the company, Jane heard about how he and Noreen were getting really cozy. And every time they're at coffee breaks, the words were getting around. And so Mary's starting to get suspicious. And she does a bit of snooping around and she discovers that John and Noreen's affair. And then she goes right to him with the news. At first, Mary didn't believe Jane. But when she checks for herself, she actually caught him red-handed and red-faced. And John is shaken because he never thought he'd be discovered. And he figures that if Mary never knew about Noreen, she could never be hurt. And for the first time, he is really guilty now. And he begs her to forgive him and tries to explain it. I could see how hard you were working with your studies. I didn't want to be selfish and demand that we become intimate, but I missed that so much. And with Noreen, it just happened. And then I guess I continued because I needed it. I never meant to hurt you, and now I can see I was selfish. I was so stupid, and I promise you it will not happen again. And Mary is so heartbroken and furious at that point. Why couldn't he have said something? Why did he have to betray our marriage just to meet his needs? And for the first time, she sees that her drive for a degree has become a booby trap. And she starts weeping uncontrollably. She's crying when she's alone. And John's equally devastated. It tore him right up. And he keeps begging her for forgiveness and swears he'll never see that woman again. And because she truly loves John, Mary forgives him and tries to make some changes. She cuts back on her classes and she gets involved with tennis playing again Saturday mornings. She tries to be intimate with him several times a week, and they're passionate and enthusiastic, and I'm going to be faithful. He makes full intentions to be faithful. But in the first 2 weeks after this confrontation, he gets one of the most severe depressions he's ever had in his life. And whether or not he likes it, his love bank has taken its deposits. He now loves Mary and he loves Noreen. And he misses her, Noreen, but he can't leave Mary. So he loves and he needs both women. Both of them, he needs them at this point. They both got substantial balances in his love bank, and he can't seem to do without either of them. And hard as he tries, he can't stay away from Noreen. And he relieves his depression and gets back together with her and finds that she's been depressed in his absence. And she welcomes him back, and they have a wild time together. And they plan more elaborate ways to get together without being discovered. But soon Mary becomes suspicious and knows that she's sharing her husband with another woman. And a woman that he's become addicted to, and he can't break it off. So what happens next? I want to hurry and get this part done because we want to end on just so you understand what's happening. See, people like John and Mary go to these marriage counselors at that point. And the man wants to end the affair because of the pressure that's happening at home. She wants him to get rid of that other woman because it's driving her crazy. And the other woman may have grown tired of being noble and patient, and she begins pressuring him, divorce that woman and marry me. And John, in this story we've told, he's the guilty one. He can't bring himself to let either of them go. And he's like, there's a donkey looking at a bale of hay here and a bale of hay there, and he doesn't know which one to take, so he nibbles from both of them at the same time, off and on, when he gets the chance, so he doesn't starve to death. He can't decide. And counselors are sometimes able to help people like that and sometimes not. It depends on whether the one that went into the wrong and committed the adultery and the lover that they're committing it with can be separated permanently or not. That is an absolute must when something like that happens. And the couple needs to learn to meet each other's basic emotional needs. Now, you might still be asking yourself, should I be concerned that my husband's going to have an affair if I'm not meeting all his needs? After hearing these stories, should my spouse fear that I might have an affair if my needs aren't being met? And yes, both sides are a real yes. This counselor has taught because of his experience in dealing with people. And it's not good news. And then somebody says, well, whatever happened to commitment? What about trust? How can a marriage function if partners can't trust each other? And commitment is exactly what we all want. We need that. And trust is vital to keep a couple bound together. But this counselor said that with his experience with thousands of people, there's an undeniable truth. If any of the spouses' 5 basic emotional needs are not being met, that spouse becomes vulnerable to the temptation of an affair. And when you examine each of the areas in each other's lives separately, spouses can learn how to take care of each other in ways that will make their marriage resistant to that kind of thing ever happening. More importantly, their marriage can become more exciting than it ever was before, more fulfilling, even with more trust than there's ever been before. Now, last week, we talked about 10 emotional needs of men and women. And while all 10 are shared by both sexes, male or female, 5 seem to be rated by women as the most important, and the other 5 are rated by men as being the most important. Let me put that back on the screen for you, just so that you can see that again as we get ready to close this lesson tonight. There they are. The difference between men and women when it comes to the priority of these 10 needs makes it hard for the two opposite sexes to feel for the other and understand and feel where they are. It makes it hard. Why, they ask each other, are these 5 so important to you? None of them strikes me as so vital that I couldn't get along without them. And at least for a while, so what's wrong with you? And because of that lack of understanding, the couple unknowingly works at what you can call cross purposes. They're each trying to fulfill the needs that he feels or she feels for the other. And wives, they'll shower their husbands with affection because that's what they want and they appreciate it so much. And on the other hand, husbands smother their wives with intimacy because physical intimacy is one of the man's top needs. And each becomes confused when at the best, the other one just responds with, mild pleasure or becomes annoyed, irritated, or frigid. And that sort of behavior, when one spouse gives the other something that he or she doesn't really need that badly, it becomes self-defeating and destructive. So in closing tonight, Because the priority of men's needs are different from the priorities of women's needs, each partner has to take time to discover and recognize the other's most important needs, those with the highest priority. Many people think they can do it simply through intuition. Oh, I can just sense what her needs are, or I can sense what his needs are. But no, this man, after dealing with hundreds of couples, maybe thousands, I don't know how, he's been doing this for 40 years or so. It can only happen with clear and effective communication training. The husband and wife who commit themselves to each other to meet each other's most emotional needs are going to lay a foundation for a lifelong happiness. And they'll have a marriage relationship that's more deeper, more satisfying than they ever dreamed possible. And so when we continue on with next week, we're going to get into two of the most important needs for women. And men, here's what they are: affection and intimate conversation. And the two most important needs for men is intimate fulfillment and recreational companionship. And so we're going to start with affection, because when affection is met, it lays the groundwork in meeting the need for intimacy. And so we'll end there for tonight.